Skipster is the guest management platform used by top event teams for everything from guest lists to seating charts and online invitations. If you're looking for next-generation event software that helps deliver perfect guest experiences, head over to Skipster's website. It's Skipster, ZKIPSTER.com to try a free event.
Are you a follower?
9, 8,
Okay, so we're gonna be
Welcome to GatherGeeks, a podcast by BizBash, the place where people passionate about meetings and events come together. Here are your hosts, BizBash CEO David Adler and Editor-in-Chief Beth Kormanik.
Hi, David.
Hey, Beth, here we are, another GatherGeeks podcast.
Our guest today is Mark Cooper, CEO of the International Association of Conference Centers. He's going to share insights from the association's annual Meeting Room of the Future report. These touch on F&B, technology, cybersecurity, pricing strategies, and more. David, tell us about the context for this conversation.
Well, I was at the MPI World Forum, the big conference that they have in Toronto, and we got a chance to sit down and talk, and it's just amazing how the actual fantasy of what is going to happen is actually happening in the meeting space and the conference centers. People are thinking about new ideas, new ways to do things, and a conference center is no longer your old-fashioned conference center anymore.
Right, and also with, you'll get into some topics not only on the venue side, but also the presenter side. Our listeners can look out for the conversation on banning PowerPoints.
Oh, yeah. Death by PowerPoint.
We've all been there, probably on both sides.
Yep.
Well, it's an interesting conversation, and let's just get to it. Take a listen.
So, Mark Cooper, we're here at MPI, World Education Conference. You and your organization have been doing an incredible job of an education program here. Why don't you tell us first what you're doing here and a little bit about your organization?
I welcome the opportunity, David. So we've been immersed in MPI's WEC for the last 3 days, talking about what the future of meetings, needs to look like, how we get there, and how we get there as quickly as possible. And the backbone of what we've been doing in our organization is IACC represents the top 1% of meeting venues in the world, but more importantly, our Meeting Room of the Future research is into its 4th year now, and 2 years after the last time we went out to the meeting professional community, we've come back again to look at what the key differences are. So 250 meeting professionals in 5 continents around the world have told us, what's important today, what they foresee in the next 3 to 5 years, and that's what we've been here sharing.
Okay, so if I'm a CEO with no attention span, what's the big takeaway?
A CEO with no attention span is cybersecurity. It's that sustainability and waste management is absolutely pivotal and in the eyes of the meeting professional today. And they will evaluate venues based upon their credentials in those areas.
And what is the state of play? Are we there or are we nowhere close?
We are not there. We are there in terms of recognizing that it's a integral element of what we've got to do to improve in the future. We can't be there today because, the infrastructure, the way we do business, the way we procure space, still puts up and throws up barriers in regards to getting us to where we've got to be in the next 3 to 5 years.
So what's the question that the event organizer should be asking of the conference center or the venue in real time when they want to investigate those particular areas? What's the physical question? Let's tell them how to do it.
Well, in my view, we've got to lift ourselves beyond the standard practice of asking, the core elements of a venue. Yes, we do need to know the size of the meeting room. We do need to know its layout capabilities, etc. We've got to get far beyond that at the request for proposal stage because, we've got to be asking them, tell us about your social spaces outside, your ability to be able to network. Where might the distractions be that's going to stop my delegates doing great things outside of the meeting room? We've also got to be asking them, what are your credentials in regards to waste management?
What are the credentials? What's the credential that we should know about?
Well, the credential I believe that we need to know about, David, is how do we reduce the need to have waste at the end of the meeting that we've then got to repurpose?
No, but is there sort of like we've learned all about LEED LEED certified.
Yes,
Is
we
there
have.
is there a buzzword that we should sound like we're smarter when we ask the question?
Well, there is something similar to LEED that's incoming that I think is going to start to address it, but we can't ask for it now, and that's the Event Industry Council's certificate for arranging sustainable meetings. Brand new, will come out today, but that's giving the equivalent of the LEED certification and putting into the hands of the meeting planners some way to be able to codify, evaluate, and put together a meeting that hits a high bar. So we will be getting there. We're not there today.
So we're just like normal with BizBash. We're about 5 years ahead of our time.
Well, you may well be. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing in that.
Well, no, in terms of the fact that we're trying to point out things that are going to be happening in the future for the event industry.
Absolutely right.
And that you're going to be asking, the questions you're going to be asking are, name the question again, just to reinforce it.
The questions that you're going to be asking is, what are your credentials in regards to both your sustainable practice, so that's what you put on the table.
When you say sustainable practice, what do you mean by that?
What I mean is what you put on the table, what you put on the plate, and what goes...
This is for food, F&B.
This is for food.
Okay.
This is food. Yes, outside of food, of course, it's our sustainable practice around, what are our plans to eradicate the need for flip charts that use paper? It's so archaic. The flip charts of today will be going in the store cupboard with the overhead projectors and the 35mm slide projectors in the future. I'm confident of it. Technologies today are incoming, and one thing that drives change, even more quickly than evolutionary, is when you believe that your customers are seeking it out and you can have the competitive advantage.
So what else is going to go? What else is going to go into the closet? What else is going to be replacing that?
Well, it's going to join the 35mm slide
Yeah,
projector.
I like that. People will understand that.
Yeah, of course they will. Of course they will. Well,
I think one of the things that's going to go in the trash bin is going to be tables that don't move, which is already happening.
Of course, but we still have too many of them. We still have too many setups with banqueting chairs and round cloth tables, even though we know they provide the polar opposite of the meeting experience that delegates need. Flexibility is key. We're going to lose the tiered auditoriums in terms of the old context of them. We're going to be putting into that cupboard. Let me make this a virtual cupboard for a moment.
Yeah, let's
but we're
throw
going to
stuff
put the
in.
minimum food and beverage spend in there as well, because the one thing that's driving, unsustainable practice and greater waste is the fact that we're still selling space linked to a minimum food and beverage spend and encouraging our buyer to over-order because, they believe they're getting better value in that way. So there's a number of, physical things that will go into that cupboard. There's also a number of ways that we do business today, the practices that are going to go, hopefully be banished because they're holding us back.
Okay, what are those that are going to go into the cupboard? Let's go through them.
What are going to go into the cupboard? Well, let's look at cybersecurity as an example. What's going to go into the cupboard is the security measures that a meeting venue puts in place that are more akin to the security you'd have for your home router, that protects your family's Wi-Fi. So many venues still provide only levels of security that are at that base level. Now, my prediction is, we will all be put in the cupboard really quickly the day that there is a significant cyber breach at a conference, whether it's a political event or, any event that's got media spotlight and focus on it. The day that happens, the day we all get a wake-up call, and we may see the equivalent of GDPR being focused on
our business,
on our data flow throughout meetings.
In the temporary pop-up event world.
Well, in both. The temporary pop-up event world sometimes could be deemed as being more robust. And I say that because when you're putting in infrastructure for your event that's very specific with a event with a supplier partner, you will specify those levels, you will make choices. When you walk into a venue, that infrastructure is already in place. There may be, you may make assumptions that are unfound. What we're seeing from a venue perspective is that venues have moved very well in the last 5 years from offering low quality, lower levels of broadband, to now offering good levels of broadband, but now they're looking at how they're able to segment and protect and provide protected environments.
Okay, so putting on our event organizer hat, what is the question that the event organizer should ask when they're going into this new frontier?
if I were evaluating a meeting space tomorrow for any of my events, when I look at cybersecurity, I would be asking the venue, what is the age of the equipment that you have in place there? So I'll give you one example. Are your access points more than 3 years old? Well, there's a relevance to that because access points in venues that are over 3 years old, the technology changed significantly 3 years ago to be able to better cope with large volumes and people with numerous devices. So, the quality of the equipment, not just the fact that they offer Wi-Fi. The second would be, and is of equal importance, it's no longer acceptable to have an AV technician there ready to support your event. Now what you need is a combination of an AV expert and IT expert because so many aspects of the digital element of your meetings now requires the expertise of somebody at an IT level.
And so what's the question that you ask? Like, I'm going to put the Mark Cooper list of
the
top 10 ideas that people should be asking as an event organizer to be really practical. Like, you're asking, will you provide a tech? I mean, it's quite simple as that, right?
Yeah, it will be. What level of support and expertise will you provide around the AV and the IT needs of my meeting? What can I get from you that I do not need to hire in from an external company? What is the age of the equipment? What expertise have you got and track record in regards to delivering meetings where 5 or 6 or however many elements of the meeting delivery relies on broadband connectivity and infrastructure? How many of those can you cope with easily?
So we went through security.
We did.
We went through sustainability.
Food and beverage, and the culinary elements. I'll talk a little bit about the meetings experience now related to food and beverage, and only because we know the experience is all encompassing. The ability to impact in a budget-friendly way the experience through your culinary offer is incredible. And what we saw in the research in this year and what we are hearing from meeting professionals is they are being encouraged to deliver greater experiences, but they're not given the budget and the bandwidth to be able to do it. And that's maybe because they're not looking to leverage their suppliers, their venues, the culinary offers, for instance, that they can provide enough. You're asking for Mark Cooper's top 10 tips. Maybe tip number 3 would be, approach your venue that you're considering and ask them how they are able to come in and influence your refreshment break with a live demonstration. It can be as simple as showing your delegates how to make chantilly cream, and then they go in and pipe themselves into their own pastry. Great fun, a little bit of learning, interaction, selfie moment. Cost the venue nothing other than their ability to participate and realise the value that can have. It doesn't impact the budget of the meeting professional, and more importantly, they're not having to think about creating experiences in other ways that are not authentic and that are involving bringing people in or products in, which again hits a poor note on the sustainability front.
I'm doing a story on what fine dining restaurants are teaching event organizers, and the one thing I learned, and what you're touching on, is always be learning. That everybody wants to learn how everything is made, and that is an experience in its own itself.
Yes, they do. And David, another tip. We looked this week at why is there a perceived or real difference between the experience we get at restaurants when we go there on a Saturday evening with our friends and loved ones versus the perception of the quality of food when we come to a meeting. There's a gap, aren't there? We have to be honest with ourselves. We don't get as excited about conference dining before we attend an event as we do going to a restaurant. And we held a panel session on Tuesday just looking at that subject matter, and it's interesting. The one thing that came out is the lack of stories sometimes. So when we go to a restaurant, we already know a little bit about that restaurant. We probably know a little bit about that chef. We hold the chef in high regard, and we want to be a part of that story and that success story. That chef is hidden behind a number of brand barriers when we go to a conference. And one of our meeting panelists, one of our meeting professionals that were part of our panel, stepped forward and said, actually, for me, I perceive the quality of the ingredients to be lesser when I come to a conference versus going to a restaurant. In defense, our venues who were also on that panel said, but that's simply not the case.
It's perception.
It is pure perception.
Right.
And so we need to do things to create the story, and we need to do something that elevates the ingredients and the thinking and the quality of the team, the brigade that sit behind those screens creating the meals that we put out at meetings. And then we can start to get as excited as we do on Wednesday as we do on Saturday evening.
Right. Let's go to the room. What else is going to go in the trash heap? In the storage bin. Is the Podium dead?
The Podium is probably dead, as will be those great big tins of beige paint. So, no more beige walls, no more bland, neutral colors. We need to invigorate people with their eyes, and we need to put them into an environment where they have a sense of excitement without compromising good acoustics and good lighting. So what we will be throwing in the trash can is those meeting environments or those networking environments that look super cool and trendy, but nobody can hear each other speak in them because that's the worst form of innovation that you can bring in.
It's too cool for school.
Too cool for school, yes.
Yeah.
We will also lose those wonderful stainless steel serving dishes that we see, at lunchtime. The only time that I ever see those big square silver dishes are either in a conference, when I think back to when I was at school, or when I see programs about prisons. And, we really now are in this, in this environment where we've got to have this small dish mentality, family service, small dishes, creating service environments where you can relate to it from what you would expect to put on your dinner table at home. Anything that we do that is that is unique to meeting environments and you don't see it anywhere else, we really have got to question ourselves because we're not making the right connections.
Building a memorable experience for your guests means planning every detail right. Skipster is the guest management platform designed to help you create the perfect experience, from impressive online invitations to seamless check-in at the door. Get started at Skipster, spelled ZKIPSTER.com, for a free test event. How about let's go into immersive AV. What are we going to see? How is that world going to change, and how is the PowerPoint going to change? How is the actual presentation tool changing?
Well, it's interesting you talk about that because, David, we are moving further and further away from PowerPoint.
Thank God.
Thank God. Absolutely right. It is a necessary evil in some regards, particularly with graphs and etc. But let's talk about the immersion and the adoption of new ways of being able to learn, because we're still, even though we are changing our learning environments to deliver, like we have been doing on our showcase, in a more conversational way, as opposed to a barrier between our audience and presenter, we're still actually following up at the end of our conferences with, a link to a page with the slide decks. Well, that's, so how we capture, when we talk about immersion, we've got to think about new ways on how we capture the essence of the conversation in the meeting room better, and to be able to share that with attendees post-event in a way they can do something with it. That's important. But generally, when we look at technologies that we've been bringing in and introducing into our meeting environments in the last 5 years, they're kind of growing up now. They've gone from the young, cool kids to now, the more competent, thoughtful companions. And that this week you see the example of Slido now being a part of the conference app, as opposed to a separate app you had to download because it was a standalone.
All right. However, I have a little issue, not with Slido in general, but one of the things that I think that we're losing in our meetings and conferences is the ability to see what other people think in the real world. So at my events now, I do this thing where I say, I'm going to use this really old-fashioned technology to figure out what you're thinking.
Do you mean the putting your
And
hand
you
up?
put your hand up. Because I think that's the brilliance of that in combination with the technology is to see what your neighbor's thinking about something. And
Yes.
so I do believe that there's that we have to have a right balance
We
of
have
technology and we can't just depend on technology.
I couldn't agree more. And hopefully you saw this morning we did a little bit of that,
Yeah, we
right?
needed a
First
little
thing,
both, yeah.
some discussion,
Yeah.
some raising of hands, some use of technology to help, maybe break down a few barriers. But you're absolutely right. If there's one thing that I've learned from Mike van der Vieva, who's our meetings architect, helping our presenters this week at WC is, we've got to stimulate by doing the unexpected and doing things differently. So I would agree. We absolutely, we can't move 100% from one base of communication to doing, 100% something else.
Right. So on my soapbox, I'm going to go on my soapbox here a little and
Do
let
so.
the head of the
That's-
association that deals with all this respond. I believe that one of the things that we are falling on our face on is that conference centers and convention centers see what's going on to make meetings valuable all the time. And they're not aggregating that information to train facilitators on how to really facilitate a room. I believe that all event organizers are really collaboration artists in the end,
Yes.
and that we're not providing the help to our customers on how to really run effective rooms and effective meetings, and not leaving it only up to the event organizer who is concerned mainly about the logistics. And it's this, and so I would say that we're providing the razor, but we're not providing the razor blade from a Gillette analogy.
Yep.
And that I think there's a future possibility of great revenue if
Yeah.
we provide that soft service.
I absolutely agree. We have some great, competent core deliverers in terms of venues. I wanted to say order takers then. We're not. That does our industry an injustice. But we're very competent deliverers of core services. We have to raise ourselves above that. We have to become that experience creator, that consultant. But equally, David, it's very important that it's reciprocal both sides, because there's some part of our meeting planning community that maybe feel that they're hired to do that,
Right.
and therefore they will be very specific. And
Although what we should do is, I'm looking at the idea that at a venue is a platform, and just like other platforms,
Right.
they provide apps and technology around the platform that know how to use that particular facility in a way
Yeah.
that's best. So we can then share that with the practitioners, and we sort of certify the people that
Yeah.
know how to use our facilities to use the technology is the best possible way, or to create a meeting that the collaboration artistry about it really works.
Yes, I totally agree. And one of the reasons why that's going to be very important as we move forward is we're continuing this cycle of the part-time meeting professional. So it's not the individual that maybe is here necessarily at WEC, because it's everything that they do Monday through Friday, or in our case, Monday through Sunday.
Right.
But it's that individual that is willing to reach out
Well,
and look for expertise.
the hidden planner is the big bulk of the buyers. I know that I've seen surveys from many of the conference companies that they're finding that the professional planners are only one part of their sector.
Yeah.
But everybody, the CEO wants to do a conference on X, Y, and Z to bring people together, and they need the help. And so all of a sudden, the hidden planner doesn't know really what to do to make it effective, and they've got a $1 billion company that's at the hands of an administrative assistant.
That's absolutely right. And in our research, you will see there is this move towards, the survey respondents base, where less and less of their total overall time is dedicated to meetings. That's good in some ways, because again, they're open to new ideas, they're open to our expertise as industry leaders. But you're right. In summary, we need to be seen to be the companion that can help them elevate their meetings experience at a venue level. And that may, in the next 5 to 10 years, see a change in the skill sets that we have in our conference offices and up front, which will be refreshing.
There's also more margin in that than F&B.
There can be,
And so,
if you get it right.
yeah.
Absolutely right.
What do you think about, this is maybe a little controversial statement, what do you think about transparency and margin? because you're talking a little bit about we're putting all this into F&B minimums.
Yes.
But the reason that we're doing that is because that's where the money is in many places, like in hotels, it's heads and beds. And so.
Well, I'll put it this way. We know overall what we have to take as a profit, per delegate or per square footage in our meeting space. So if we all behave in an open and transparent way in the same way, what difference does it make if that comes through room hire, through a CMP, versus a minimum food and beverage spend that all that does, as I say, is encourage you to extend beyond your needs? Higher room hire fee versus a high food and beverage, low room hire fee. Surely that's one approach.
Right. Well,
that's
so
simple.
some of the more progressive third-party conference centers are doing per head pricing and things like that. Is that going to be the wave of the future and the meeting room of the future?
Well, you're preaching to an organisation that that's part of our conditions of membership. So. All 400 IAC members have to offer the complete meeting package, a per delegate package, which is all encompassing. But what it is doing is it's putting together a package of the food and beverage, the technology, the meeting components that the majority of meetings will want, that a staple provide satisfaction. They're not driving them to go into a super CMP package. So yes, that's the most transparent way of doing it. It avoids a hidden cost. Nobody wants to be paying extra for that paperless flip chart pad in the future. They want to know what it is up front, and it's easier to budget as well. So I am, of course, an advocate of it because it's a backbone element of IACC certification worldwide, but it's not. We recognise it's not always the case in different countries. They have different preferences, and sometimes these CMP packages are met with a little bit of suspicion. Why are they packaged up? And
right.
and if I knew what X, Y, and Z was, then
you also talk about meetings. But I see in our world that events and meetings and festivals and conferences are all morphing together. So these big conference centers are becoming pop-up facilities for brands that are much more than meetings. Is the meeting room of the future the event? Is going to be an event because people are going to be hiring these conference centers to be their office for a week at a time?
Well, it's interesting because our centre of gravity is not the events, and yours is, David. So you know that world incredibly well.
I see it coming.
What I see the festivalization of meetings as one of the symptoms of us wanting to create greater experiences. So we are, that gap is morphing. Is this a festival? Our own European conference for IACC is called the IACC European Knowledge Festival.
Right.
And it's a conference, but it is that mixture of fun, socializing, experiencing, and learning. So, the lines are maybe blurring a little bit.
And the key thing that you brought up is that fun is no longer a four-letter word for meetings. That fun.
I did say that, didn't I?
Yes, and I think you're 100% right. But it's part of the meeting of the future is understanding how the mind works and how you're simulated, and fun is part of that. I've been reading all about the forgetting curve and things like that,
okay.
And all these, and how you balance AV with neuroscience and use AV to actually cleanse the palate in your brain so that you can learn more. And I mean, okay. I think that I think the conference meeting room of the future is going to evolve into all of that science, and it's like going to be a laboratory for a knowledge festival in your own brain.
Do you think finally we're working out we're humans and we're not corporate machines?
I hope so.
That would be great, right?
Yeah, I don't want to corporate speak. I don't want to corporate speak. I have friends that are telling me, don't say that. That's corporate speak.
Well, yeah, but think about this in relation to the barriers we're continually knocking over now. So a little while ago, we talked about the fact that it was okay not to have a very obvious corporate setting for meetings. It could be a little bit more home-like, and we could still be productive in those environments in meetings. When we step outside of the meeting environment, it used to be, an unspoken word that you were socializing. We had to call it networking.
Which is the worst word ever.
Which is the worst word ever, and we can get stuff done while we're socializing. It's, go
Yes.
figure, that can happen. And maybe it's the same now where we're creating environments that are fun and stimulating. It might be cleansing our minds a little bit to be a little bit more pure and a little bit more open as well.
Talk a little bit about one of the things I've noticed about your organization is the innovation of some of the members. I know that Convene is a member, and they're killing it. Some of the other places around the world are doing events in castles. And talk about the new environments for having meetings that are set up with an infrastructure to do it, so you don't have to start from scratch.
Yes, well, and I'm incredibly lucky that we have 400 venues that probably are unique in their own ways. Castles, urban day centres, these concepts. One thing that they all have in common is they're incredibly entrepreneurial. They haven't designed meetings like the meeting space that was designed yesterday. They're designing something a little bit different and a little bit more specific that's probably left field from your typical hospitality venue. And that's what makes up the IACC community. Some of them are incredibly unique space. If you go to Sweden, you can be, again, in a castle on a lakeside that only has 15 guest rooms, and they will, serve dinner in a very different way. They may be all-inclusive, like the Sandals of this world. But again, that's satisfying our hunger for creating the unexpected for our delegates. They're not typically the big box, hotels that you will find.
I think some of your venues I describe as sort of the fine dining of the conference world, and that certain people really want that.
I think to one extent that is true. I think to another is I consider them the fine dining equivalent to the area of specialism within that niche. So there's some incredibly immersive learning environments that could be found within a university-cited conference centre. Now, they may not be providing fine dining in relation to, the guest room
fine dining in terms of the experience, that this is the highest level of thinking.
In their niche, absolutely right. They are, they are the five-star equivalent. And that's our goal. Our goal is not to be the largest organisation, only ever representing the top 1%.
So, let's take the last few minutes and see if we've put everything in the trash heap that we need to put it in. Is there anything else that you want to put into the trash heap before we end?
This is like in the UK, we call it Room 101, the programme, right? And, what are we going to try and lose in the future? We've talked about cybersecurity. We've talked about the influence on food and beverage and meeting spaces. I would like to see, going into the trash heap, the decision making between do I have more natural light and lose the quality of the visual element from the screen, or do I want, I want to take away those, the decisions that we have to make. Why can we not have great technology that gives us the information, but we can still get our vitamin D and our natural daylight? How do we feel like we're outside when we're not outside, when we step outside of the meeting room? So I'd like to see us having to make less decisions and have what we know, feeds the soul and feeds the mind. Well, standard practice.
Technology should be invisible.
Technology that's good, it shouldn't be obvious. You're absolutely right.
I live under the premise that the whole purpose of technology is to make what was complex trivial.
Yeah.
And that's what my holy grail on.
Yeah. And lastly, I would say I want to eradicate the unnecessary site inspection. Now, I'm 30 years in this industry and in sales, and the one thing that, I check myself when I say it, we always want to see our buyer face to face. But actually, that's not, necessarily the right thing to do every time. In the way that, if we can allow our buyers to evaluate meeting spaces remotely, but accurately in terms of floor plans and, getting a feel for its situational analysis. The time that we save, having to travel to that venue, the other side of the coast, can be better spent having a more in-depth discussion with the executive chef on a Zoom call or a Skype call, so she can tailor that menu to be more inclusive.
Right.
So, I'd like to eradicate all the stuff that's high burn, bad for the environment, unfortunately, giving us maybe, a bad, a bad sort of perception from the outside world in terms of meetings. Let's be smart.
We haven't even gotten into hologram speakers yet to cut down on travel costs and things like that.
And isn't that interesting from this morning's discussion you and I were in together where, there was this, the cost of bringing in a hologram speaker today was lower than having to fly that person in halfway across the world. So actually what they were able to do, spending the same amount of money, was to get a higher quality keynote speaker. And I thought that was amazing, because I don't think, from a delegate and attendee perspective, that they lost anything. I think it's just being smart.
Right. So Mark, how do we get in touch with you? How do we get in touch with your organization?
So IACCmeetings.com is where you download the IAC Meeting Room of the Future research. We've touched on some of the core elements. There's so much more there. So IACmeetings.com, guides, downloads, find out a little bit about those unique venues that we have around the world. That's how you find us.
Great. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, David, we're back. Tell me, how far away do you think the meeting room of the future really is?
I think it's actually farther away than you think, but closer than we had thought about in the past. I think people are trying new things. I think that there's more innovation that's happening every day, but I think we don't even have a clue yet of where spatial computing is going to be taking the meeting and event space.
Mark talked about the possibility of virtual site inspections, kind of reducing unnecessary travel, which is good for the earth, but also possibly more efficient. I'm wondering for you, though, at this point, would you trust a virtual site inspection, or what needs to evolve for you to trust what you experience virtually?
Absolutely not. I think that if I'm going to invest that many people's time in something, I want to see it no matter what, just from a sense of trust. So I don't think we're there yet. But then again, people didn't think that they would trust like taking an airplane or things like that too. It took them a while to get used to it. So maybe it'll just take a little while to get used to.
Okay, that one's still evolving.
Yeah. So Beth, what is going on at BizBash?
Well, speaking of venues, we have been publishing a new round of location scouts, which are our picks for the most exciting new or renovated venues in cities across the U.S. and Canada. So if you are planning an event in New York, L.A., Toronto, Chicago, D.C., Orlando, many other cities, get inspired by our picks. Maybe you'll find your next venue. You can find all of that on bizbash.com.
So great. So as we always end these podcasts, actually, we like to thank the people that worked on them. Claire Hoffman is our editor, who watches out for our editorial style on these podcasts. Rebecca Pappas helps us distribute it. And of course, Dave Nelson, our producer, puts it all together. So with that, what do we say, Beth?
Gather on.
Gather on.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. We can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Player FM, Google Play, and Pocket Cast. Be sure to leave us a rating and review. It helps others discover the GatherGeeks podcast. We'd also love to hear from you. You can leave feedback on Twitter @GatherGeeks or leave us an email, gathergeeks@bizbash.com. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode of GatherGeeks. Until then, gather on.